look back history suggests that race should be treated as a mere footnote. Are we a footnote? We might be the note. It refuses to acknowledge that race is part of a historical fabric of this country, embedded in its foundation. I'm just going to segue a little bit. Why there was such a stronghold on slavery? Not only did we provide all the labor, we had all the knowledge. We came from a continent knowing metallurgy, knowing blacksmithing, knowing how to grow and garden, basically knowing how to build a country. They had killed off the Native Americans for the most part, or relocated them to the West. So, and they tried to enslave them, but that didn't work. So, let me get back to this. Those who oppose, it refuses to acknowledge that race is part of the historical fabric of this country, embedded in its foundation. Those who oppose critical race theory as its core deny the fact that race permeates every policy and institution in America. It ignores the reality that race always will be a key operative in how this country goes about its business, whether Americans choose to talk about it or not. The argument against critical race theory defies what many Americans, regardless of their race or ethnicity, know is true. That systematic racism is a byproduct of slavery that has outlived emancipation. I'm just going to call out my young man, Jonathan. He just experienced racism this week. He was offered a job at Volvo, and he has a name that really doesn't connotate a black name. His last name is Grosjean. They saw his face, they made up an excuse that he had something on his record, and they didn't offer him the job. They're like, well, can you tell us, what's really on your license, Jonathan? Like, my license is clean. But God has a way. Amen. Praise God. Because he was offered a better job at a higher rate. So, it's here. And unfortunately, it's not going away. Much of America's black history has been covered up to make slavery seem less abominable, disgusting. Disinformation campaigns have long been used to distort black history and diminish the contributions of African Americans. I'm going to call some of you out because I know a little bit of your business. Our pastor, and even myself, he was hired at a place. They would talk to him over the phone. They'd never seen his face. They know he graduated from quite a prestigious institution where very few of us attend. And when they met him, they're like, "You're Barry Robin? Really? You're Barry Robin? You're the person who I talked to on the phone?" Yes. Yes, I am. Believe it or not, y'all, yes, I am. So the myth of us not being able to perform anything, it's not even a myth, it's such a lie. But it's a way to keep a nation of millions down. Donald Trump told the Wall Street Journal last year, now he wasn't president no more, but we all know about him, that he was responsible for bringing Juneteenth to the attention of mainstream America. Really? He said nobody had ever heard of it until he had pushed his political rally back a day because it was scheduled on the holiday. Well, if he had heard of it, he wouldn't have had his rally on that day. But that wasn't true. But there's a little bit of truth in that. Trump admitted that he had never heard of Juneteenth, and most white people hadn't at the time. And many African Americans hadn't heard of it either. How could most Americans have known? This part of history is not taught in public schools, along with a lot of other things about us. There's barely a mention in history books because America has never been interested in telling the true story of slavery. I'll have just a little bit more, y'all. Juneteenth is a day to reflect on both bondage and freedom, a day of both pain and purpose. It is, in equal measure, a remembrance of both the long, hard night of slavery and subjugation, but as well as a celebration of the promise of a brighter morning to come. And Juneteenth marks the anniversary of the announcement of the General Order by the Union Army General Gordon Granger of June 19, 1865, to proclaim the freedom to the enslaved people in Texas. And those were the Confederate States. And I'm going to just end with this. My African brothers and sisters, and also my Caribbean brothers and sisters. And I know in the Caribbean, slavery was supposedly outlawed long before the slavery here in the United States. But then, as Europe does, colonization came here. And colonization was really not much better than slavery, because you were still subjugated to the roles that they wanted you to do and the roles that they wanted you to have. And then it wasn't until a full century later that most African and Caribbean nations were no longer colonies of the Queen and other European countries. It was the 1960s. About the time, maybe they got afraid because that's when, the civil rights movement started here in the United States. But all throughout that, one good thing that did come out of the Emancipation Proclamation, there was created the HBCUs, the Historical Black Colleges and Universities. And they, of course, still wanted us to have segregated education platforms. So most of the schools were trade schools, but at least now we had our own institutions. And there has been now a significant interest in our children and other children going to these HBCUs. Howard is one of the schools that has a medical school. And there are a lot of people, not of color, who are attending their medical university, as well as some others. Little interesting fact. We had many more medical schools in the United States until the 1900s. And I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he basically deemed, I believe we had 10. He basically deemed 7 of them not reputable, and they closed them down. Can you imagine how many more doctors we would have had if we had continued to have